Re leboga thata mme Winnie Matikizela. You are my role model, a strong woman, a leader, a helper, a mother to our nation.
Dear Lillian Goy, what you did gave us free and rights.
Na myang influencer mo pilong ba ke me ekna moliwa.
Dear women of yesterday, I may not know your names, but I appreciate the big step you took to fight for women's rights. Because of your actions, women's voices are heard.
Ekna moliwa ine ile myo o analing kutlwelo botlhoko mo batšheng. O ne a re rotloetsa gore re tsene sekolo.
Ke mokhethile ka ke strong woman. Ke example ya gore re le di young women tshwantse re phele bjang, tshwantse o sa ditlogella o nne strong, o kgone tikemella le ka osana. Le di example dilo tse pila tse di rileng ba di bona ko ene. She was a fighter.
Nna ke khethile mme Lillian Goy because always di rights tsa basadi ba botlhe ba South Africa ba race yotlhe gore ba botlhe ba tshwane ba lekane.
Basadi ba kgale ba tlile karolo e kgolo mo matshelong a rena, cause ba kgonne go ya kwa ba matšhe go lwela ditokelo tsa rena basadi, and then ba kgonne go re lwela gore like mosadi a tswe botho ba hae a sa nna ko tlasa moruti wa monna.
Many women took part in fighting for women's rights, but as young people nowadays, a re lebelle batho ba ileng hore ha ba mentioniwe on the history. We do not get chance to know their names and appreciate them.
Mosebetsi wa gae o tlo o tswela pele.
The political situation was not easy for women then, but now women are even able to be part of the parliament. Their voices now are heard.
Rena re le basha re nyago itsweletsa pele, and then re khona bona gore le ba batlang go mora wa rena le bona ba khona tswela pele.
That's why ke re ke nyako nna fighter ka how le fighter you will never give up in life. Ntho e nyakang o tla e fitlhella.
I love you for what you have done. Thank you.
Ngiyakuthanza kakhulu. Ngibale njalo.
Good morning. A very good morning to you and the listeners.
Thank you very much. And we are still on Women's Month celebrating leadership that women bring. And today I'm privileged to be sitting with someone who is a leader in terms of deconstructing experiences of women in the Bible and how we look at women through the Bible. And that's something very close to my heart, because as a Christian, it's something that I always find my struggle with in terms of how the Bible seems to elevate men and seems to, bring women down, and even the way women are portrayed in the Bible seems to give a message that women are subordinate, women are there to destroy. If you read the Bible, you will see the many stories where women are portrayed as people who are there to destroy these men of God who are chosen by God, And I always had a problem with that, to say, but God, are you telling us that we are not worthy of being chosen? We are not worthy of championing a cause? But we will hear more about that. And so let me introduce to you Untitled Hadebe. She's the international coordinator for the side-by-side gender justice movement, and also she's part of the Circle of Women Theologians. Hadebe, Dr. Hadebe, good morning and welcome.
A very good morning to you, and I'm delighted to be here, to be invited, and I totally understand, the issues that you are raising about the Bible. Because if somebody had to come from another world and step into a typical church, they will see that the leaders are mostly male, the ones that are interpreting the Bible are mostly male, and that there are some beliefs about women that we have internalized, that somehow we are inferior. And so what I want to do today is really to go to the beginnings of the Bible, to show that's why we as women theologians decided to study the Bible so that we are able to interpret it for women, so that it becomes good news for women. Firstly, we want to look at the creation narratives, the creation stories that we see in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and also the story of the four that we see in Genesis chapter 3. And also after that, I want to talk about how women are a central part of the three events that shape Christianity, so that by the time, we are done, you have no, all your uncertainties are cleared, and you know without any doubt just how valuable you are, and that women are equal, they are empowered, they are part of God's plan for the world. So when we go to the creation stories, we are not talking science, we are talking the core beliefs of our faith. So those creation stories reflect the core beliefs of our faith. So they are true in that sense. Okay, so when we look at the first creation story, we encounter in Genesis chapter 1, 26 to 27, God speaking in the plural. God says, let us create human beings to reflect us. So you can imagine the angels and everybody was just wondering, what is this that is going to be created that reflects God accurately? We are not like God, like we are not on the same level. We are created by God, but God was going to express who God is fully in the next creation. And guess what? It's a simultaneous creation of male and female, created simultaneously and created by God in God's image. So straight away, we know that we are made in the image of God. We reflect God. There's something about who you are made in the image of that reflects on your identity. Being made in the image of God means that there is no ways we can be inferior, we can be marginalized, we can be incapable of anything. And let's go even further. So when God speaks in the plural and says, we are going to express ourselves in the next creation, and out comes female and male, we know that God is being expressed here. So right here, we know that when there is no expression of the female, the complete expression of God includes both male and female in their diversity. So we need to just grasp that. And then we go on into that text where we are told that God speaks to the first human beings in the plural. There's no like, now I'm talking to the male, this is what you need to do. Now I'm talking to the female, this is what you need to do. No. There is the speaking in the pronoun they. God says, go out and multiply. So we see already that sexuality was already in paradise. It didn't come with women, it came with God. So let's settle that one. And then, and God says to both of them, take leadership. You are going to be my representatives on this earth. I'm giving you stewardship of the earth to manage. So right there, we're assuming God is intelligent. God knows what God needs to say. God could have easily said, okay, now these are the male duties. Now these are the female duties. God doesn't deal with that. God says you are equal because God in God's self is equal. There's no hierarchy, inequality in God. So right there, both of them are given leadership position, responsible positions. So we can say without any doubt, no human being created to be inferior or of humanity expresses God. So an image of God that leaves out the feminine or the female is incomplete. Yes, we have God talking for God's self, saying, let us. We assume that God speaking in the plural, God knows what God needs to be saying. So out comes female and male. That one is settled. We are created in the image of God, and we have dignity. We are amazing. We are created after a God whom you cannot even describe. So magnificent is this God. So that says something of the quality of who we are. And we are created for leadership, for taking responsibility for all the areas of life. We see that in Genesis chapter 1. So now we come to the second creation story in Genesis chapter 2. And that's the one that many people know, because here we hear that women are made of spare ribs. And so there's this kind of understanding of the inferiority of women. And we want to discuss that. But the first thing that we need to reflect is that the Bible always speaks in repetition. Stories are told twice or three times in order to deepen our understanding. The example that we know is the 4 Gospels. The 4 Gospels are telling the life of Jesus, and they repeat the same incidents, but they just don't repeat mindlessly. They add, they deepen, they allow us to go deeper because they are responding to different questions. So we have the repetition in the Gospels. We also have a repetition in the Psalms. It's a technique where you want to teach truth in different ways so that people don't forget. Remember that, people didn't have Bibles in those days that they could just consult. Everything was like in memory. So you needed to tell something in a different ways in order to communicate different aspects of the truth. And so we come to the second creation story. And already we know that the second creation story is going to say exactly the same as the first creation story, just as in the Gospels. John is not contradicting Matthew. Matthew is not contradicting Luke. They are saying the same thing, but they are coming from different perspectives so that we have a richer understanding. And so there we are in Genesis chapter, and they are, rephrasing the entire creation. And I don't want to go into details, but I want to focus on those aspects that have been interpreted to mean that women are inferior. So we need to face those aspects. So we read about the person or the creature that was made, Adam, and he was put to sleep, and then God takes the side. That word that is translated as rib actually means side. Because you find that same word in other parts of the Bible, and it's not translated as rib, it's translated as side. So takes the side, but that doesn't, whatever that is, the reality is that a woman is 100% God made. The man wasn't asked for an opinion. God didn't say, okay, man, what do you think we should do? There was no conversation between God and male. The woman was an exclusive work, 100% God made. So we need to claim that, so that no one who didn't make us has authority to tell us who we are. We are God made. And when a woman opened her eyes, the first being that she encountered, the first words that she heard were coming from God, affirming her value and her dignity. And she could actually see the reflection of herself in God, because we are created in the image of God. So the reflection of woman is also present in God. So that's how we need to be affirming. And then the Genesis 2:18, where the word is translated a helper. So in our language, in our day-to-day living, a helper is somebody who is, less than the person who they're helping. But in this particular context, because it has to match Genesis chapter 1, the word used for helper is Ezer. And it's the same word that's used for God. When we say God is my helper, we say God is my Ezer. So there's no inferiority there, for sure. You're talking about power. You're talking about equality. So right there, even the way in which we are named. So because of the translation, the Bible is being translated from Hebrew to English, and we know it. You know, if you try to translate some of our African language words, you can't translate them into English. It's really, you need, like, for example, Ubuntu. How do you translate Ubuntu in one word? No. People have written books trying to translate Ubuntu. So again, there's a problem with translation. So, you know, so helper has nothing to do with inferiority. Otherwise, God would be inferior. If we say the Lord is my helper, we are talking about an inferior person. Same words, same concept. So already we see these two stories merging with one message, both female and male in the image of God, equal.
Yeah. Let me come in them and ask them. So, I mean, religion is one of the systems, you know, if you want to see how patriarchy operates, go to organized religion and look at it, right? And you've articulated very clearly how even that story of creation is used, you know, to show that men were favored because the spare rib story comes through, you know, and men claim that, you know, you are my spare rib, you came from my part, and whatever, all those things that are being said. But you mentioned that there's no hierarchy in religion. No, not even in religion. There's no hierarchy, you know, in creation. But religion speaks of hierarchy. So where does it come from? Why do we then have issues of, you know, men are the head, women are the support, they are the neck, whatever they call women? Where does this come from, and why is it so prominent? Because that's the tool that is used to oppress women.
Yeah, and it is. You are right. I think what the authors or the interpreters of the Bible, the theologians, were all male, and they were coming from a patriarchal society that normalized hierarchy, you know, that favored the male. That's what patriarchy is, and the woman. So they brought those lenses. Into their readings of the Bible. Let's just give a practical example. Now, for example, if we look at slavery, I had the privilege of going to visit a slave port in Benin, West Africa. In the middle of that slave port was a chapel. So the slave owners will go and pray because they were able to read the Bible from their positions of power. They were able to isolate some of the teachings of St. Paul, where he says, slave, obey your masters. They were able to take those out of context and use them to justify the dehumanization of the Black bodies. So we already have a history. We already know that those that are in power at a particular moment in history are able, because of their power, to take particular readings of the Bible and interpret them in a way that reinforces the culture. So you have a patriarchal culture where there's hierarchy. The male is the leader, the female is subordinate. So the way in which, instead of like starting with Genesis 1 that talks about simultaneous creation, equality, you emphasize Genesis 2 and speak about spare ribs, you speak about order, and you read through those lenses of patriarchy, and you create a theology that makes it as if it is God's will to create inferior human beings. And really, again, we have to always say, the Chinese say that 99% of what you see is behind your eyes. It's in your head. It's in your power structure, your identity. And that's why, the decolonial theories say that when somebody is speaking about anything, they need to be aware of the social location where they're coming from. So we have patriarchal, interpretations of scripture, throughout, and even when we look at Genesis chapter 3, which is the crime scene, you find that the woman is portrayed as seducing the male to be able to eat the fruit. But if we, like any crime scene, you have to go there and you have to ask yourself who was present at a crime scene. So if we look at Genesis 3, it says that the serpent, we are introduced to evil. So evil was already existing before. That's why it was there to tempt. So we have the evil represented by the serpent. We have the woman there, and we are told also that the male was there. 3 people, 3 present at the crime scene. And we know that God had said, do not eat that tree. So the serpent speaks to the woman. The male is present there. She didn't have to look for him. He was there. He also had the gift of freedom. So he could have said, stop. I am not going to do this. I'm not going to eat that. He had the same freedom of action as the woman, as the serpent. He also could have said no. But the way in which that is interpreted gives us the impression that this was a conversation between the serpent and the woman, and the male was somewhere out there. The reading of the text makes it very clear that he was right there listening. He chose to be silent. He chose not to exercise his freedom to say no. She simply said, eat it. And they were both naked. So there was nothing strange in that. So the way in which it was interpreted. So I want to give an example that is fresh in our mind. This the trial of Oscar Presorius. There were only 2 of them, with him and his girlfriend in that house. But the difference is that he had millions. So he was able to get lawyers who were able to look at that crime scene and begin to play around with the evidence in such a way that it looked as if he didn't do anything. So we had the first High Court judgment that gave him a lighter sentence, although there were 2 of them. It's just the power. We see how power works. When you've got power, you can take information, you can take the evidence and twist it and play around with it so that you come across innocent. And we saw that. But then when it went to the second appeal, they re-examined the evidence and they saw that he was guilty. So that's what we are doing as women. We are re-examining the evidence in the Bible that has marginalized, inferiorized us, and made us as if we have no role even in the Bible, that we are inferior, we seduce men, all those kind of negative stereotypes. We are re-examining that evidence, just as the judges re-examined that evidence and found Presorius to be guilty. So we are re-examining that evidence, same evidence, to find that there's an ideology of patriarchy that is working against the spirit of the Bible.
Yeah. So how do we then begin to practically deconstruct and decolonize the Bible, looking at the evidence now? What do we do?
Yes.
Because religion is a powerful, organized system. It's marginalizing people. It's creating hate among people, because if you are different from me, I'm taught to hate you, right?
Yeah.
I hate anything that is different from me, and I base it on this is not what God wants. So how do we then begin to decolonize our thinking and use the evidence that says, women, you belong. Women, you are there. You are not subordinate. You were not even created to serve men. You were created because God wanted all of us to live together. God saw it fit for male, female to coexist. So how do we begin to change that? And what is it that women in your circle, you said it's circle of women theologians, what are you doing to deconstruct and to decolonize the interpretation that we sit with that is creating so many problems in our society?
Yeah, and it's such an urgent, request that you're making, such an urgent work that you're making, because the way in which those in power have manipulated the Bible. And even like, for example, there are some texts, like if we go to Timothy, where it says that, where Paul is talking, again, when we look at those letters in the New Testament, we need to understand that there is a context in those letters, and they are written to different churches. So, for example, if I was a Christian in the church of the Philippines, I would have lived as an equal, because that's a church that there's no teaching on gender hierarchy. So what we need to do again is to go into those problematic texts that have been used to justify and to present a God who is anti-woman, a God who is anti-LGBTI, an anti-God, an unloving God, a God who creates hierarchies. And yet that's not even the nature of who God is. So we need to, in the process of deconstruction, we need to bring together, it's like if you are reading a book, like I find sometimes when I am introduced to a series, a drama series, when I watch the 10th episode, I can misjudge everything because I don't even know where it started from the beginning. So here I am watching the 10th episode, and then I'm misinterpreting everything because I didn't start from the beginning and I don't know where it's going. So that's what happens with the Bible, that we need to read the entire text in its context so that we get the spirit of it. We get the spirit of who God is, a God of liberation. The first act that God did when there were people that were oppressed was to liberate. The first act was to create all human beings in God's dignity. We see in the Acts that there is a preferential option for the poor. And so we see that the whole ethos, if we look at the overall arching, is really what Jesus said, I've come that they have life and life in abundance. So at different historical situations and addressing different contexts, text was said, to say, women, keep quiet. And we need to be understanding what was going on for that to be said. It's like when you are coming into a house and you hear people arguing and saying things to each other, unless you know where the story starts from, you'll just pick up things and not take it together in context. So that's what we women theologians are doing, going to study the evidence. We've got New Testament scholars writing, challenging all these interpretations. We've got Old Testament scholars at UNISA. We've got Professor Masenya, who is the first African woman to graduate with a PhD in Old Testament. She reads the Hebrew Bible, and she has come up with her own Basadi theology that looks at the status of women and the way in which the texts have been misinterpreted in order to communicate, to support those that are in power. And it's the same, for example, when you look at decolonization. You can think that there's nothing in Africa about Africa in the Bible. We are told that Jesus went to Egypt, but the way it's spoken, it should be Egypt, Africa. Jesus spent his early lives in Africa and not in Europe. And yet we don't have that because of the way Egypt is portrayed as if it's not a part of Africa. So you find that those nuances, those small things that are there to portray a particular exclusion of people, an exclusion of the African presence in the Bible, an exclusion of the woman's presence in the life of Jesus. We are told in Luke chapter 8, verses 1 and 4, that Jesus had women disciples, Joanna, Susanna, and we never ever hear about them. Who is making those decisions as to what do we erase? What do we emphasize? And for example, I always say, everybody has heard about Jezebel and Delilah because they show women's power over men. But who has heard about Shipra, Pure, Holga, Martha, the first woman to challenge God on God's law, the first woman to act in the midwives that were brave. So we find even in what we remember, who we remember, that is even constructed to make sure that there are certain women's names that we all need to know because they are categorized as dangerous. But there are even more dangerous women that are leaders, that are thought leaders in the Old Testament. Like what I was saying, that the three events that shape our faith, the Exodus, that's where the law came in. It started with women. It started with the courage of women. your Shipra, your Pure, that we've never heard those names mentioned even in Sunday school. So we need to be questioning why. Why are we not naming those powerful women that started the Exodus? And so when we start with the Exodus and the liberation, it starts with women. And then when we go to Luke to start with the life of Jesus, it starts with women: Mary, Elizabeth, Anna. And right there, Pentecost, the start of the church, the women are there. There are actually more women mentioned in the book of Acts than the apostles themselves. So this kind of erasure, this marginalization of women's voices is not by accident. It's intentional. It's to make sure that the ideology of patriarchy is baptized in Christianity so that we feel as if it's normal. That is how God wants things to be. God wants us to be inferior, to be marginalized, excluded. You simply wipe off the history, and it's all intentional. It's not an accident.
And thank you for bringing this to light. I know a lot of women who feel discouraged, even thinking God really doesn't love women, and what's the point of even having a relationship with God? But I think for me, the one key issue that religion is very brutal on is the issue of the LGBTI community. And you were mentioning that, and I saw Tanga also in her comments saying, because of church, she can't reconcile with homophobia, because we are taught that it's a sin. We are taught that the very same people that God created in his image are sinful, and because of their sin, they should not even be part of us. They should not be amongst us. And we are taught to hate, as I said earlier, instead of embracing and loving and knowing that we live in a diverse world. We are taught to hate everything that is not prescribed. There's like a prescription that is given, right? It must be, you must be this, you must be that, you must be this. As a woman, you are this, you are that. If you don't then fit into that mold, you are now called names. Hence, your Delilahs and your, what's the other one that you mentioned? Jezebel. Those are the prominent women that churches will speak on. But never in my whole life have I heard any sermon preached on the rape of Tamar.
Yeah.
Because there is rape. There's a crime scene in the Bible where a woman was raped by her brother, and the father failed to even come, to the rescue of this daughter, to even embrace the daughter. Instead, the father mourned the son and not the daughter, which perpetuates this understanding that is out there that the boy child is the most precious, the boy child is the most, important. Even the Trinity speaks of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I think it's also from that thinking where men believe that they are representatives of God here on earth. Because the Trinity speaks of the male figures. And nowhere do women feature. So I'm really again interested in how do we bring back religion, or no, and should we even call it religion? How do we bring back the relationship with God outside the constructed system? I think for me, that is what is important, because we live in a country that is 80% Christian. So we can't run away from being Christian. Like I declared, I'm a Christian myself, but I'm in constant battle with some of the teachings that I was taught from a young age, the indoctrination that I had my whole life. I'm now having to make decisions about whether I'm going to practice what I was taught. And in some spaces, you then lose faith with those people who believe you are now a demon.
Yeah.
Because you can't be talking about, let's embrace the LGBTI community and call yourself Christian. You are now considered a demon. You are demonized. When you speak about women's rights, bodily autonomy, when you say women have a right to choose whatever they want to choose for themselves, you've fallen off the wagon. You are now, the devil is controlling you. The devil is controlling your mind and your thinking. And I think it's a constant battle. But I'm interested in how do we then take away that power from this system and start putting it back into women's hands, for them to know that they are also chosen they can bring the change, because we are talking about women making change.
Yeah.
Our whole Women's Month is dedicated to the change that women bring. But in the religious space, what is that change? How do we give women that power when they sit in churches where they are told they are quoting Paul or whoever they are quoting, who says women must listen to their husbands, they must not speak in church, they must not do this, the prescriptions that we spoke about earlier. How do we begin to give that power back to women to say the interpretation is incorrect, the correct interpretation is this?
Yeah. I really, you are raising such fundamental questions, and I'm going to give some examples to talk about how you really take back power for your own, and I will give an example. But I want to start with the fundamental construction of who God is in the Trinity, where we have like a male majority there, and that gives the impression that God is male. And so when we look at the Spirit, and we look at Ruh, that's the name of the Spirit because it's the breath of God. And we see that the Spirit is feminine. And so that is the feminine, because if God is going to say, I'm going to reproduce beings that reflect me, so it means that within God there is the feminine. And I think that is something that we need to be upholding. So we see even within, the understanding of who God is in the Hebrew Bible, that there is this mystery of, for example, the Spirit being feminine, and also the wisdom of God being feminine. And we can read that in Proverbs chapter 8, where wisdom, says that I was created by God. What wisdom says is similar to Christ. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And when we read Proverbs chapter 8, wisdom speaks for herself, says, I was there in the beginning with God. I was the co-creatrix there. So we begin to see the we, because where would the female animals come from if there was no feminine in God? So even that one, you see that people don't even want to acknowledge. And I think one theologian says, is the marginalization of the Holy Spirit reflecting the marginalization of the women? Because the Spirit represents, is a feminine present description of God. And also, even when we look at the Shekinah, and people speak about the Shekinah glory, which is the presence of God, that's also female. So we find, and that's so interesting. Not only is it in the naming of God, that there's an intentional not wanting to go deeper into the Spirit. I go to a theological library, and if you go to the library, you'll find shelves on maybe Jesus, shelves on God, and just maybe one shelf on the Holy Spirit. So again, the kind of resistance to entering into the possibility that in the very presence of God is the female, and it has to be there. Because how can you create something that you say is in my image, and yet it's not within you? So we need to be able to, to recognize that female presence in God, and the fluidity of God, being able to refer to God. I know that if I have to say God is she, then I would be, stoned to death. But then it also speaks about the way in which God has been locked up into this small cage, and with a label that says he. So you dare not even imagine the possibility of a female presence within God, even though Ruha is feminine. So you are dealing with like such fundamentals that people can kill you for that. So we know that that's what happens. And so when even when we come to LGBTIQ, we can accept diversity. We can accept diversity of IQ. We can accept diversity of eye color, of face, DNA. We can accept that. But when it comes to sexual diversity, we can't. We put a barrier, and we go straight into Leviticus And there is a text there that a man should not sleep, with another man as with a woman. And we're so selective, with Leviticus. If you just take one, you have to take the whole teachings. They come in a package. You can't just pick and choose, and they come in a context of worship, of creating a different kind of worship. In those days, other religions, that's how they worshiped. So we need to take things in their context. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, then that's it. Like it's the seal, to say that this is such a clear message that God wanted to destroy anyone. And yet those men were rapists. They were trying to attack other people, But what is interesting, I think, that we take is that throughout the Bible, there are different interpretations of the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. Jeremiah writes a different interpretation. Ezekiel says it was because they didn't care for the poor. But I think let's go to Jesus, because I think if Jesus speaks, we are assuming, we need to make certain assumptions. Jesus represents God. Jesus knows what Jesus is saying. So when Jesus in Matthew, I think 15, I'm not so sure, when he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, he doesn't mention homosexuality, neither does Jesus mention sex. But for us, that's like the default. So we need to be really understanding that unless Jesus is misinformed, then I think our theology will disrupt. So when Jesus is talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, Jesus does not talk about homosexuality or sex. Jesus is talking about it in terms of how we receive the messengers of God. So let's stay with Jesus, who is the ultimate revelation of Christian faith. And let's see what he says about Sodom, not what I say, because people may think I'm just being biased, but we're talking Jesus here. So we put it there. And also, I think the other issue that you were saying about how do we take back, I always go back to the example of not only slavery, but also the Kairos here in South Africa, although we abandoned how people were able to take the theology of apartheid and deconstruct it and say that, like, for example, if you looked at the theology of apartheid in the Kairos document, where they took like Romans 13, where it says you must obey the government that was being used to silence Black resistance. The Kairos document reinterpreted that to say that the God's call is for just governments. So they interrogated all the theologies that supported apartheid. So I think it's one of the documents that is a legacy for women to say that in this country, the Christians, once upon a time, were able to deconstruct theology for the liberation. So having that legacy means that women can also go to the Kairos document and deconstruct patriarchy in order to liberate women. So there is a document, you can download it in the Kairos document and begin to see the methodology that was used to be able to liberate, to be able to deconstruct the theology. We know that apartheid was based on certain interpretations of the Bible. So a liberating theology went and attacked every single one of them, so that Christians were able to rise up and see that the struggle against apartheid is a God struggle. Similarly, we as women need to go back to that Kairos document, deconstruct patriarchy, and also normalize the struggle for gender equality as a God struggle. We see that in the slaves, African Americans as slaves, they simply just took back the Bible for themselves. They started to create music. They started to create their own structures and institutions. And they are the ones in churches right now who are dancing, not their oppressors. So they were able to encounter a God of Exodus who says, I hear the cry of my people. I'm here to liberate. I am a liberating God. I did not create any human being to be oppressed, to be beaten, to be inferiorized. That's not me. So the African Americans encountered this God, and wow, they started singing songs They started getting energy and they liberated themselves. The Kairos theologians in South Africa in the 1980s looked at the apartheid theology. They encountered a liberating theology. They started to attack one by one all those theologies that dehumanized, inferiorized the black bodies. And they said, we are encountering a God who says black is beautiful. I created black. Black is equality. That's what we women need to do. Download that Kairos document, and we need to reframe it so that the equality and dignity of women expresses who God is.
Yeah. So why does it seem like those voices are silent? I mean, we are still hearing in the main these male patriarchal voices and patriarchal interpretation of God. Where is that voice that, this voice that you are representing now? Where is it? Why is it so silent? Why is it not coming forward so that women can start, living liberated lives? LGBTI community members can start living liberated lives and having a relationship with this God. Because right now, there's somebody who's putting them in a box, even preventing them from appreciating their creator.
Absolutely.
So why is that voice silent? Why is the patriarchal voice louder than this voice, this feminist voice, that and that interpretation that is so much needed for the liberation of everyone?
Absolutely. And I think, we as feminist theologians really need to take blame for this, or, we need to also, the restriction is there because there is sometimes there's an internalized, oppression where we feel, and also fear, where people feel as if we now challenge this, does that mean that God will punish us and all of that? But I think we need to be creating more spaces as feminist theologians, which are such a minority, so that those voices can keep going out, and whatever we need to be doing and occupying those spaces, not only during Women's Month. I say every day is Women's Day. So we need to be finding those voices and spaces where we are talking to women, where we are making these messages heard loud and clear. Because really, the plan of God for women, God was only by God's self in the creation of women. There was no consultation with men. We are 100% created. And therefore, God is our standard. And that dignity that we have we are made in by such an incredible, being that makes us incredible. We don't need justification. And I think it is time for feminist theologians to rise and to begin to popularize this theology in every way, because it needs to be good news. God loves women. In every intervention that God has made in the world, God has started with women. Women are at the center of what God, and actually the central belief of Christians comes from a woman's body. We are born again. Who gives birth? Women. So women's body are the language of God. We are born again, where we read about God breastfeeding people, whose body is being used to talk about God's actions, our bodies. So this body that is being defaced, that is being beaten or raped, is actually defacing God. And really there is an accountability somewhere. But I think it is also up to us as feminist theologians to raise our voices in every platform, consistently saying how awesome women are, how awesome every human being is, because we are moving towards a place where just being human is enough, where we remove these cages. When I look at nature, there are no cages. The birds are flying free. The fish are swimming in the ocean. No cages. The people that make cages are human beings. We cage people. But the one who created them did not create them to be caged. Everyone has a role to play. by oppressing women, we are oppressing knowledge about God, knowledge that we cannot even imagine. By oppressing LGBTI people, we're oppressing the image of God. And even we can even say with people with disabilities. So because we have this image of God, or the right image as a heterosexual male, so people with an able-bodied, so we make that a standard, not realizing that all the bodies, whether they are differently abled, reflect God. And God doesn't need our opinion about what reflects God. God is reflected in everything that is created. And that is why even the plight of animals and the earth are part of our passion, because everything created is a channel of God's revelation and a contributor. We simply cannot afford to have any inferiorization of anything that God has created. It's so unlike the very core of who God is, and we need that message to go out so that everyone on this planet needs to walk with dignity and pride. They are enough.
We are enough. And until we dismantle, we disrupt, we will continue hearing this patriarchal theology. And women will continue being oppressed, women will continue being subjugated. We will never live our true freedom, even in a country that is 80% Christian. I always question, if we live in an 80% Christian country, why do we have femicide? Why do we have gender-based violence? Who's perpetrating this violence? Isn't it the very same people who claim to be Christian who are perpetrating this violence? You know, so until we disrupt and remove these boxes, as you say, these cages, women will never live their freedom. They go to spaces where they're supposed to be loved and praised, and those spaces violate them. Look at the stories that have been coming out of how big churches, you know, are using those platforms to manipulate women into having sex. And women, the poor, are manipulated. They become even poorer, enriching somebody who claims to have a better relationship with the Creator, who's able to interpret what the Creator wants for you. And in doing so, they take from you the little that you have, and you live in poverty while they live luxurious lives. So we need to disrupt. All I'm asking for is, can the feminist voice come out and disrupt this theology that is there? This theology that preaches a male God, a heterosexual God who hates anything that is different. Yet we know that God is love. You know, so those contradictions are very confusing. People are killing themselves because they cannot reconcile themselves with what is being taught in churches and how their families are treating them, because we are teaching families, we are teaching mothers to hate their sons. When the son says, "Ma, I don't want to marry a woman, I want to marry another man," we are taught to hate. And it's painful. I mean, it's emotional for me, the pain and the hurt that is caused to people in the name of religion, in the name of God. You know, the silence that is there in those spaces when women are being violated. You know, you are told as a woman, go and pray, forgive. If you want to demonstrate that you are a prayerful woman, you stay in that abusive relationship. Because when you leave, it's a sign of weakness, of you not believing, not having faith. And these are the messages that are out there. But today, you and I have a different message. And I think as I'm challenging you, I'm also challenging myself to say, what is the message that we are putting out there? About creation, about God, about religion, because religion is a powerful system. It's organized. You know, it's like organized crime. It's so organized. And as you said, people are afraid to challenge God. People are afraid to offend God, because the God we are taught of is the God who punishes, is a God who will make sure that the pain you feel is felt from generation to generation. You know, so women tend to just submit. And also,
you know,
don't want
yeah.
to do anything else except submission. So before we close, I have there are a few comments that are coming through. Let's look at this one from Lebo, who says, does organized religion still have a role in society, or should we reimagine how we interact as a body of Christ other than organized bodies?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I totally agree with that, because we really need to provide an alternative. We work both ways, that, you know, we work within the structures to see if it's possible to change. And we are seeing some changes. But at the same time, in order for our own health, we need to, you know, people need to know that they can create a sacred space in their home. We've got 24/7 access to God. And we, you know, just that understanding of our dignity and how much we are loved, we need to hold on to that, you know, especially as women. 24/7 access, confidence. God has confidence in women, and we can and we should be able to create those spaces, those safe spaces for ourselves, and to be able to continue to challenge. And I think the Circle of Women Theologians challenges organized religion, but challenging should be one, but there should also be creation of expressions of faith. And the main story for women is found in Numbers chapter 27, where Martha, Holga, people that we've never heard of, those names that we don't even know, went and they challenged God. And they said, your law is oppressing us. And I love what God says. He says, the women are right. Change the law. This is the God we need to be going back all the time, who is able, who listens to women. And we see the same thing when that woman came to Jesus with her daughter, and Jesus was like, no, I only came to Israel. That woman challenged Jesus and said, you know, even the dogs can eat the crumbs. So we see those voices of women engaging at a challenging level with God, and we see God saying the women are right. And these are the stories that we need to tell, so that we extract that fear that you are talking to a dictator in heaven who doesn't even negotiate, who doesn't even listen to women. We are talking about a lover, a keeper, a creator who listens to women, who listens to the stories of pain, and who desires to act.
And I see comments are coming, and you know, we are at the end of our 1 hour. But the take-home message for me today is that we need to disrupt, we need to dismantle. As Lebu is saying, we can organize outside of this organization called religion. Because that organization is only there to keep men in power.
Yeah.
It's not there for anything else but to retain the power and to retain the oppression of women. So it's up to us as women to educate ourselves and to have our own understanding of this God. You know, I think COVID came as a blessing, because we started going to those buildings where you are going there to be indoctrinated. You know, we started seeing God differently and relating to God differently. And I can tell you, many are going to say so many things about this conversation. You know, negative things, because like I said, anything that you put out there that doesn't follow the norm is considered demonic. I'm sure my mother will be called to say your daughter needs prayers because she has now become a demon.
Yes, and worse for me, I'm already, you know, I'm probably, or according to them, destined to hell. But fortunately, they're not God. And I think we need to constantly remind them. They were never consulted in our creation, and they will never be consulted in our lives. Really, the God who is there, who loves women, who loves justice, who loves equality, is on our side.
And so if we want gender justice, we need to make sure that institutions like these ones are dismantled, because until they preach the God who is love, you know, who is all embracing, you know, the God who loves all of us equally as he has created us equally in Genesis 1, until that God is the one that we speak of on a daily basis, then we need to start questioning. I think questioning is what women need to do. Each time you hear, and let me, before we close, because I see and I want to close this session, let's take another comment from Lebu, who says, the institutions are man-made. Yes, Lebu, we agree. They are man-made. Even the interpretation is favoring men, as Dr. Hadebe was saying, you know. So we need to reimagine institutions. God remains God. We can never change God. But it doesn't mean subscribing to institutions is subscribing to God. And that's what the confusion is there, is that once you subscribe to a particular institution, you are subscribing to God. You know, and that is why now they will define who this God is and how you need to relate with this God. And that is the power that we need to take back. We need to go back to having a relationship that is not prescribed, that doesn't have prescriptions. And God still speaks even today. He didn't only speak in those times that are now locked in a manuscript. You know, he still speaks. He can speak to me today. He can speak to you today about something else, but people also refuse to hear him. They want to refer to the manuscript. And that is interpreted from a male and patriarchal perspective. So as we close today's session, Hadebe, I want to thank you and challenge you and me and anybody who says they are Christian to start living the true values of Christianity, which is to love. That's the greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Understand that we are all made in God's image, and embracing one another is embracing God. So thank you. I don't know if you have 5. I've been asking anyone coming to the platform if they have 5 key take-home messages that they want people to remember from the conversation we had today. So please give us your 5 bullets and we will close on that note.
I as I said, you know, we as women need to be assured 100%. We are 100% created by God with no consultation from anyone. We are 100% made in the image of God. We are, you know, we are called Ezras, which means that we are powerful. So we are created to lead, created for dignity. There is no indication of inferiority. God has never created an inferior race or an inferior persons. So we know that religion is literally man-made. And so part of dismantling patriarchy is the restoration of faith, where everyone is free to be themselves, starting with women. This is our faith. This is our God. This is our world. And we have been placed here by God. God speaks to us directly, and let's hold on to that. And indeed, Jesus was radical. Jesus had women, respected women. The early church had women who were involved. And so we need to start, you know, with the closure of churches in COVID. We need to be ourselves in our own way, communicating with God, and we will encounter a liberating God who loves women. So if you're ever confused about who you are, Genesis 1. If you're ever confused about whether women speak to God, Numbers 27. And if you want to see how God works with women, then go to Exodus, look, and you see that we are in the forefront, partners with God for transforming the world. The world needs us. We give birth to everything, and we will give birth to a new world.
Partners with God as we transform the world. And that will be our closing statement today. And continue engaging on this topic. I think it's not a once-off topic, this one, because of how fundamental the issues of religion are in our society. So I am sure this one will be an ongoing discussion, and I encourage it to be an ongoing discussion in our families, on different platforms, let us continue bringing the new narrative, that of God created all of us equal. There is no man, as Levo says, who can stand before us and interpret God for us. We need to have a personal relationship with God and interpret God for who he manifests to us, how he comes through to us, not how somebody interprets how God should come through to us. So thank you, Dr. Hadebe. This was wonderful. She leads change, and today the one who was leading the change is Dr. Hadebe, helping us understand how we can dismantle religion. And on that note, I say bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having such a wonderful host. Your questions were amazing. Thank you, dear listeners, together.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.